Okay, so what I was thinking of doing today is because now it gets tricky, right? We're getting into like a rapid fire time of year where you barely have time to learn about a Yom Tov before the next one hits, right?
Yeah.
Don't really have a lot of time, right? So right now, usually, it's a good time to start learning about. Oh, somebody else is here. Um, So right now, it's a good time to start learning about Elul, right? But the problem is because Elul is starting this Shabbos. It's Rosh Chodesh Elul. There's a lot to learn, right? The whole month of Tishrei, right? The whole holiday season, right? Where we have Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchas Torah, Shmini Atzeres. We have so much going on, right? But that actually doesn't begin then. It begins now. It begins during the time of Elul, right? So what we do is, you want to start learning about Elul. You have a whole month, but then by the time you finish learning about Elul, you didn't get a chance to learn about Rosh Hashanah. So what I was thinking I'm gonna do is today, instead of starting a new mimer on Elul, which is gonna take us a few weeks, I wanted to just kind of like summarize, kind of like a blend of ideas from different mimarim of different things as it comes to Elul, right? So just it's going to be like its own standalone share on Elul, and then that way we can come into Elul prepared, knowing what to think about, what to focus on, and then and then the next week we can start perhaps learning about Rosh Hashanah, and then if we finish Rosh Hashanah, we can start learning about Yom Kippur. Hopefully, we'll get a chance to learn at least about one or maybe two holidays. Okay, so that's what I want to do today. I want to kind of just not really focusing on a specific mimer, but just kind of take you through a few ideas about Elul. So Elul is a very interesting time, right? I actually I heard once a beautiful metaphor, right, about the whole holiday time, right? Tishrei time, Elul Tishrei time, which I really, really like, and I'm going to share it with you. So, it's a metaphor, like, a man and a woman, I want to get married, right? So what's the process like? How do you end up getting married and, to live your life together, right? The first step is you go out on dates, right? You go out on shidduchim, right? You date somebody, you go out, you meet each other, you kind of getting to know each other in a more like informal setting where you're kind of just, sitting, having a drink, talking, getting to know each other. Eventually you decide you want to get married, you commit to that, and you get married, right? You have the wedding ceremony, right, where you guys are both committing to each other to spend the rest of your lives together, right? And then comes the time during the wedding ceremony, after the whole ceremony happens, right? It comes a time where the man and the woman go into a room. It's called the cheder yichud, right, where they're alone for the first time, right? Up until that point, they're never allowed to be alone in private. So this time is like where they're finally alone. There's nobody else there, and they connect at a deeper level. And afterwards, you have the wedding party, right? You have all the guests come, and you have a party, and it's a banquet, and it's great. You have an amazing time. You dance, and then finally, the man and the woman go together to their home, and that's where they can be intimate for the first time, which is obviously the highest level of connection, right? And that is a whole process, right? Of like the beginning of a life together in holiness, right? So the time that we're about to go into, each one of the steps, right? We know that these are not individual holidays, right? Rosh Hashanah is not just Rosh Hashanah. Yom Kippur is not just Yom Kippur, and they happen to fall in the same month. It's all one big process, right? And each one of the holidays represents a different step in that process, right? And that begins, as we said, with Elul. And Elul, right, is the time, it's like the time of dating, right? It's a time where we start thinking about Hashem, getting closer in a more informal setting, right? It's not the time we're not spending the entire day in shul. We're not fasting or doing anything like that. It's kind of like in our own day to day. We're working, we're doing our thing. But we start to sort of look for Hashem in a way that we perhaps weren't connecting before. We start to think about like, okay, Rosh Hashanah is coming. What have I done with my year? Who am I really? Who is Hashem really? And what is our relationship going to be like, right? So that's like the dating phase, right? Eventually you come to Rosh Hashanah. And Rosh Hashanah is all about one thing, as we're going to eventually learn about Rosh Hashanah, but Rosh Hashanah is all about one thing: commitment, right? What we call crowning God as king, right? That's what it is all about. Hashem says, you know what? I am your king. And we say, you know what? You are our king, right? Hashem says, you're my people. And we say, you are our king. And that is like the marriage ceremony, right? When the man betroths whatever, the woman, and says, you know, here's a ring. Ad mekudeshes li b'tabazu, right? You are sanctified to me. You are now my wife. And the woman says, I'm your wife. You're my husband. We are now consecrated to each other, right? There's no room for anybody else, right? The man's not going to look at any other woman. The woman's not going to look at any other man. Now it's me for you and you for me. And that's what happens in Rosh Hashanah. Hashem says, you're mine. Will I be yours? Like it's, and we say you're ours. We're now dedicated to each other. I'm willing to take this whole new year and dedicate it to you, Hashem, because that's what, we're all about, right? Then comes Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, it says, what's the end of Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur ends with Ne'ilah. Ne'ilah means the closing of the gates, right? So people usually understand that to mean, it's the closing of Yom Kippur. The doors are closing. Get in your prayers before it's over, right? But what people don't understand is that Ne'ilah does mean the closing of the gates, but what it actually means is that the gates are closing, but you're inside, right? What it means is that the gates are closing. There's nobody else there besides for you and Hashem. It's Ne'ilah. It's a time of yichud. It's a time where the chassan and kala, the bride and the groom, leave the wedding canopy and they go into a room and they're able to just be in private for the first time. It's just you and me, and there's nothing else. For Hashem, Yom Kippur, that is the day, right? It's a day where we don't work, we don't eat, we don't drink, we don't do anything. We're basically all day. Hashem's just you and me, and that culminates with that Ne'ilah, the closing of the gate, where it's just literally just us and Hashem, right? Hashem says the angels are locked out. Nobody else. There's nothing else besides for us and him, right? And even us and him is not accurate. Besides for me and him, and that applies to each one of us. It's just me and Hashem. There's nothing else, right? And that is a time of yichud, that time of very, very deep connection, right? And then what follows is the party, right? The party. There's the guests on the side of the groom, the guests on the side of the bride, and everybody comes together and you sit and you have a banquet and you dance and you enjoy each other's company, right? And that is sukkahs. Sukkahs, there is all the guests that we bring into our sukkah, right? And then we know that every night there's a different guest. These are Hashem's guests. The first night is Abraham, the second night is Yitzchak, then Yaakov, and so on. Every night there's the guests of the groom, the chassan, right? That comes. These are the Hashem's guests. And we're there and we're rejoicing, and it's Zman Simchaseinu. It's a time of our rejoicing. It's a time of our happiness, and we are just celebrating, right, the connection that we just established and bringing that in, internalizing it. That obviously culminates with Simchas Torah, right, which is what Shmini Atzeres. Simchas Torah is a time of dancing. We dance with the Torah. We dance with the Torah. We rejoice. It's a full-on party, right? We dance the night away. And then finally, the most important part is Shmini Atzeres, which is a quiet holiday. You don't really, what is Shmini Atzeres? It's just a day in which, we ask for rain, which is rain is a metaphor for like an inception. It's an inception of the land, and that again is when after the party's over and all the guests go home, what's left is the husband and the wife, and they're together and they're intimate in a very, very deep connection that doesn't translate to anything else. You don't have big mitzvahs. You don't have the shofar. You don't have sukkah. You don't have any. It's just husband and bride being together, right? And that from then on, that's what sets us up for the rest of the year, to have a year in which we're committed, connected in a very, very deep way with Hashem. We're married now, okay? So all that is to say, right, that this whole thing that we're about to embark on for the next 2 months, right, it's a process. Right? It should never be seen as independent things, right? It's not its own unique thing unrelated to each other, but it's one part of a big process. And we're going to learn a little bit more about what does that mean, right? What we accomplish in Rosh Hashanah, what we accomplish in Yom Kippur, each one of the things, right? But first thing is we're starting with Elul, okay? And Elul is, as we said, is kind of like that dating phase. It's a moment for us to start kind of getting closer, we right now throughout the year, we've kind of strayed away from Hashem, in one way or another. We're just too busy with all the different things. It's a hard world, man. And it's hard to connect. It's hard to really, really live, with Hashem in front of us all the time. So now Elul is about that. We're going to blow the shofar every single day in Elul, right? We're going to start thinking about Hashem. And Elul, the word Elul, right? The name actually stands for, there's a lot of different things it stands for, but the most basic one that we go with, right? That we usually, the most quoted one is Elul, Aleph, Lamed, Vav, Lamed. Okay, those are the letters. Aleph, Lamed, Vav, Lamed. It spells the word Elul, and it stands for a pasuk. Ani ledoidi v'doidi li. Okay, that's Ani, Aleph, ledoidi, Lamed, v'doidi, that's a Vav, li. Okay, Lamed, Elul. Okay, so what does Ani ledoidi v'doidi li means? Ani ledoidi v'doidi li means I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. Okay, it's a pasuk that was said in Shir Hashirim by King Solomon, Shlomo Melech, and it means I am to Hashem, I am to my beloved, us, the Jewish people speaking, we are to Hashem, v'doidi li, right? Which means in a way that this defines the work of Elul is that it comes from us. We need to get closer to Hashem, ani ledoidi, and Hashem will reciprocate and v'doidi li, and be to us. Right? So what we are doing throughout the month of Elul is setting up the relationship, right? Setting up whatever we're going to accomplish in Rosh Hashanah needs to come happens as a result of our preparation throughout the month of Elul. And there is another metaphor, okay? So the first metaphor that I gave you is kind of like a nice metaphor to explain how everything is a process and how, overall this is about getting married to Hashem, right? But there's another metaphor, which is brought by the Alter Rebbe, and it's very, very widely used throughout Chabad. If you haven't heard it yet, you'll hear it, and it's called the Melech Basadeh, okay? And this is a metaphor about, Hashem as a king, right? Before, I was kind of like, the metaphor that I was bringing is how, it's part of our relationship with Hashem, how Hashem is our husband, bride, where it's a loving relationship, which is true. There's also another aspect of it is Hashem as our king, right? And that is, multiple things at once. Hashem is our king, Hashem is our father, Hashem is our husband, Hashem is a lot of things, right? So you've got to keep these things kind of each thing in its own place, not to get confused, right? They're all true. But this metaphor is about Hashem as our king, right? And the metaphor goes as follows, right? When the king is in the palace, right? And you and I, we're the peasants, right? We're working in the field. We're, just plowing away at our jobs, and that's what we're doing all day, right? The peasants don't usually get, to go into the palace. The palace is a place where, people to walk. You don't just walk into the palace, right? But it says, right, that once a year the king steps out of the palace. He puts on a polo shirt. He dresses up like a regular person, and he says, "I want to go out into the field, right? I want to go out into the field." Now, the thing about a king, right? It's hard for us. This is one of the big problems that we have in our generation or in our times is that there are no kings, right? A president is not a king, right? President is you elected the president. It's like we don't really understand the relationship, right? A king is a king. A king is something that's supposed to inspire awe. This is a side note, a separate story that comes to mind. I don't want to go into too many tangents, but it's a cool story. So I'll make it short. There was once a wealthy businessman, and he had connections. He used to come to the king and work with the king, and and eventually he started kind of being lax. King and I, we're buddies. He said whatever. So he comes, and he would make remarks that perhaps that's not how you talk to a king. And the king one day it clicked on him. He's like, this is not how it's supposed to be. So one day the businessman is in his town, and the king sends him a letter, and he says, it wasn't the king, it was an official letter like anybody else would get, saying the king requires your presence in on this date, this time. Make sure to be there on pain of death, whatever it is, right? So it was a very very formal, and the guy gets nervous. It's like, wait a minute, the king usually, the king and I, we speak, and he starts to think like, what did I do? Is the king upset at me? And he had let's say a month to go into the king. And he starts getting nervous. Like, what, is the king upset? Am I gonna get my head chopped off? Like, and he's nervous and he's anxious and he doesn't know what, and eventually starts going to the king. He says goodbye to his family, and he's getting more and more nervous, not realizing like, what did I do? What's happening, right? The king didn't address me as like a friend. He addressed it, and he was sweating. At the end, he comes into the palace, and there's these guards, big guards, like standing in line. They don't let him in. They have to ask, and he has to go through the whole process. And he goes into the palace, and he walks in, and they bring him to a room, and the room is huge. As he's walking through the palace, he's seeing all the different, the gold and the different things, and the majesty of the place, right? The high ceilings. And eventually, he's brought into this room, a large room, and it's all closed. There's no windows, and it's like, and you can feel like the guy's sweating, and he's so nervous. And then eventually the door opens, and the king walks in, wearing his crown, wearing his like kingly garments and his scepter, and he's standing there tall like a king. And you see this guy shivering. He's like, he sees the king, and he's like, he's literally just sweating. He's about to faint. And then all the king says to him, he looks at him and he says, "This is how you stand in front of a king." And he leaves. That was it. That was the story. And the guy goes back and everything was fine. But that was the message. This is how you stand in front of a king. So that is the king in the palace, right? The king in the palace is, it's the king in the palace and all his majesty, the king who he is, as a king. When you're standing in front of a king, you're not just standing, you're standing in awe, in respect to the degree that it's, in fear. And when I say fear, I don't mean like, oh, he's going to kill me. Like, just in fear of like, just in just utter awe and amazement of his greatness versus us. And that is what a king is supposed to be like. We don't understand that because we don't live in a world where there's kings, right? When the Tsar of Russia got toppled and was gone, one of the Chassidim said, we've lost, they were happy in a way, I guess, because the Tsar was not good to the Jews, but he says, we've lost a metaphor. Like, there's no king anymore, and people that don't understand what a king is, right? It's hard for you to, to relate that Hashem is a king, right? Hashem is a true king. So what I'm trying to say is that is the king in the palace, right? You don't just go to the king. You don't just hang out buddy with the king, right? But then the king decides he's going to take off the garments. He's going to take off the crown. He's going to leave the big, fancy, majestic palace. And he's just going to go to the field, right? Dressed like a normal person. The thing is, when the king is in the palace, he's this big, mysterious thing, and you want to go. Like, it's something that like, it's attractive to you. When the king is dressed up like this, right, and he's hanging out in the field, it might not be that attractive. It just looks like a regular person, perhaps acts like a regular person in one way or another. It doesn't have the same appeal. So at that time, it's an amazing thing. You can be close to the king. You can come to the king and connect with him. And guess what? If you connect with the king when he's in the palace, then you could go see him when you connect with him when he's in the field, then you could go see him in the palace, right? But you have to want to, right? Perhaps you're there, you're sitting and working in the field, and you see, okay, the king is sitting somewhere in a chair, like nothing big, nothing fancy. You say, you know what? I'm busy. I don't want to go. So Elul is about ani ledoidi v'deili. It means you have to make your steps. It's not fancy. You're not spending the day in shul all day. You're not talking about angels and all these. You're not blowing the shofar, like you are blowing the shofar, but not in like in the way that you do in Rosh Hashanah. It's not like that big a deal. Elul, it's a month, right? But what we're learning is that in Elul, the king is in the field, right? And because it's not a big deal, you might say, okay, I have better things to do, right? But what we learn is that when the king is in the field, it's an amazing opportunity, but it has to come from us. And our work in Elul, right, is to start the process of tshuva. It's to start the process of, recognizing, okay, like, what did I do throughout the year, right? That's why we blow the shofar every day to remind us, hey, Rosh Hashanah is coming. Let's start to think, like, who, like, what was my relationship with David throughout the year? I'm going to come in Rosh Hashanah in a month. Who's going to show up? Am I going to be like, who am I that's going to show up? Okay. And you start to think, what it is that I did throughout the year that I could have, should have, and need to do better next year, right? And you start to think, and this process of tshuva, right? This process of creating what's called the iratata, like the lower level of fear, right? Recognizing God in your day-to-day, recognizing God as the one ruling the world, right? Recognizing the king, even though he's perhaps, not now, it's not like the time, with the fancy time, right? Where the king, it's not Rosh Hashanah, right? But even then, to start coming closer, right? To go out of your desert, out of your place where you're working, to go into that field, right? And to get close to the king to connect, because what the mashal continues, right? The metaphor continues that it says that during the time that the king is in the field, that says like this, right? He says that he receives everyone. Says he receives everybody. He receives everybody. It's the key word, everybody. He receives, a king in the field receives everybody, no matter who you are, no matter what you did. You come to me. If you take those steps to come to me while I'm in the field, I receive you with a smile. He says this receives you with a smile. That's part of the metaphor. With a smile. And he shows you love and panim shechegos in a big, I don't know how to say it, like in a big smile, whatever it is. But the idea is that you come to the king, you can connect with him, right? And the king reciprocates and says, he's happy to see you. Thank you for coming, And then when you go into the palace, you can go into the palace, right, in a completely different sort of way. Right, but that starts now. That starts this Shabbos when Elul is going to be starting. Right, it says that the 13 attributes of mercy. Right, the 13 attributes of mercy that never come back empty. Right, when you say the attributes of mercy, it says that Hashem forgives you. Right, so these 13 attributes of mercy are shining in the time of Elul. Right, the only thing is, it's not like Rosh Hashanah where Hashem is, kind of shaking you and say, "Hey, where were you?" When it's like you get this boost of inspiration. Right? This is up to you. You want to be inspired, you want to come close, go ahead. The king is there waiting for you. He's going to give you a big smile. He's going to be very happy that you came. You don't want to, you want to keep you just doing your thing, just working, and I'll think of Hashem and Rosh Hashanah. Fine, it's fine too. Nobody's it's shaking you. It's up to you. Right? But if you take those steps and start, thinking about things, just literally just taking some time. Before you go to sleep, before when you wake up in the morning, whatever time works for you, before you daven, I don't know, and start to think, about your day to day, right? About who, what has my connection with Hashem come down to? Where am I? And I want to come closer. Let me do something to get closer to Hashem, whatever that translates for you, right? And you do that, you're connecting with the king in the field, and you will go into the palace and then be able to connect with the king in the palace too. And at that point, that is where Hashem is coming down. That's the Doidili. That is Hashem coming and shining light on you that will, kind of inspire you. That's when, you can feel that energy, that inspiration, that life, right? Because now you're building up. It's coming from you. You might not feel anything, but you want to try. You're doing your part. You're acknowledging that you want Hashem to be your king. You want to be closer. When you do that, even though you're not inspired, you don't feel anything. Hashem reciprocates when you go into that palace and you see the palace, and you feel, right, that light, you feel that connection, that inspiration, that comes as a direct consequence of what you do throughout the month of Elul, right? So it's up to us, right? It's up to us to really try to start the process, right? You can start it today. I mean, it's not Elul yet, but you can start. Nobody's going to get upset at you, right? The process of doing tshuva, of getting closer to what? Closer to who we are, which means getting closer to Hashem, which means getting closer to Hashem himself. And you do that, right, by whatever it is that you do, by doing tshuva, by starting to think, what can I do to get closer? I don't think it translates the same to everybody. Of course, you want to look back and think of the things that you did wrong and fix them. You want to think, but you want to think of the things that you did right and improve and boost them. It's not just about thinking all the bad things, right? And we all, it's just, I guess it's just about putting your heart into it and thinking about it and translating that into whatever that translates for you. Whatever that translates for you, whatever you think, you need to do in order to have a better relationship with Hashem. But now it's the time to think about it and to take those steps. Let's do it. And Mirz Hashem, we should all do tshuva, like real tshuva, real tshuva, not like, sitting and crying about how bad we were. None of that. Just real tshuva, real reconnecting. That's what we're really here to do. And Hashem should respond to that, and we should feel inspiration throughout the month of Elul. Of course, in Tishrei, the entire time. It should affect our entire year, so we can live a year where we're actually connected to Hashem, and the light of Hashem is actually going through us and just shining to the world. Okay.
Amen.
Awesome. Okay, so probably next week we'll probably start a mimer on Rosh Hashanah, and we'll take it from there. Okay.
Hazak Baruch. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, guys. Bye.